Good morning, Jonathan. How are you today? Morning is broken, and I at least am a consecrated host, Father Jeff, consecrated by holy orders.
And the weather is broken, and I'm your consecrated host, Jonathan, consecrated by baptism.
Jonathan, it's been rainy the last several days. There's chance of rain, like all the way through the end of this week. We're over the hump, but we needed the rain.
That is the only good thing. We did need the rain.
It is a little chilly.
It's miserable.
You're like bundled up for...
I want to crawl into my bed and hibernate until the spring.
That's a little ways away. We've got a lot of winter to get through.
Don't remind me. This is...
Remember, last spring was not exactly delightful.
It was better than the spring before that.
Really? There was kind of this thing called pandemic. Shutdown.
Okay, I'm talking
right
about weather
in the middle of the spring.
I'm talking about weather still.
Fine. Yeah, I don't even remember.
2 springs ago, I asked my phone when spring was coming, and the first day of spring was, and because it had already passed, it told me not until the next year.
Ah.
It was no.
That was kind of dim and dreary.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're very
kind of like now.
Do you have that seasonal affective disorder?
I never did until I moved to Nebraska.
The clouds, the rain, the snow. I don't know what I wonder. You know, they always talk about. I've been hearing now things like, the Farmer's Almanac. We're gonna have this terrible winter. We're gonna have all of these things.
They don't know.
Nobody knows, because then by the time it really happens, nobody remembers what anybody predicted or said. So I think it just makes you feel good now that you can complain about something that you don't even know is going to happen or not.
Do you know maybe why this weather is getting to me?
Why?
Because growing up in Houston, this is a winter in Houston, basically.
And there's no Christmas.
Mid to low 40s. There's Christmas everywhere.
There's not even Christmas now. I mean, that's what it's winter. It's like Narnia before the thaw. It's always winter and never Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah. This feels like winter and not Christmas. But Jonathan.
Yes.
Your birthday is around the corner.
It is.
Look at that. A little bit of Christmas in the middle of your winter.
It's coming up.
It's not even fall yet.
It's hard to look forward to my birthday.
You'll be in a new home.
So much packing and everything else right now.
But just think, when you get to your place after your birthday, around your birthday, you'll be unpacking everything, and you can pretend there are a lot of little birthday gifts that you're like, look at this set of dishes that I had and now have again.
Always the eternal optimist, Father Jeff.
I am. That's what people think of when they think of me. You want a bright, shiny outlook on life? Give me a call.
Oh my gosh.
I'm in a good mood today, Jonathan. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know why either.
It's been pretty. Yeah,
I think you're making up for my lack of a good mood.
Well, we could dive back into the Screwtape Letters. It's not always rosy and would you stop that? The model that he is. Okay, so we are in letter 10.
Yes.
And in this letter, this is when I read this book. I love this book. I think there's a lot of stuff to learn and to meditate upon and think about. Chapter 10, it does have a few good points, but I think it's a lot of writing for these few good points. So we'll see where it takes us. But I did have a couple comments that a few people had mentioned to me in the past couple days who've been reading the book or watching the program or talking to us, that they said it's very hard to understand.
I could see that.
It's like, if it weren't for you and Jonathan's conversation, I wouldn't get anything out of this. And one of the tricks or the tips that I have when reading the Screwtape Letters is to read it out loud.
Oh.
I find it very helpful that as you're reading this, if you read it out loud as if you were the one writing to Wormwood, if you were Screwtape, and if you want to even use an evil, nasty voice, I mean, that makes it all the more fun. But just,
will you share yours?
I will. My dear Wormwood, I was delighted to hear from Triptweeze that your patient has made some very desirable new acquaintances. Doesn't that give you chills?
Maybe not for the reasons you expect.
My point being that if it's difficult grasping what the heck he's trying to say here, read it out loud, hear yourself read it, because it makes you just, I don't know, I hear it in a totally different way. Sometimes if I have a hard time processing something, because it is sometimes like a stew, you have to chew on this before you swallow it, otherwise you get nothing out of it.
And he's not very direct with anything. It's more of a, if you're drinking out of a straw, it's not just a single, it's more of a crazy straw.
Yes, you got to kind of work it around a little bit, or right. And I think another thing that about this book that is helpful is that as you read it, it really gives you something to think about. Like, this book is written about this imaginary patient in London during the Second World War, and these are the specific things they're trying to do to trip him up and to cast him into hell. But I think this really does become a book of self-meditation. That I'm not reading this for entertainment.
Right.
And I'm not reading it really even just to learn something. I mean, there is an educational element to it. But I think more so, it's almost an examination of conscience.
For sure.
That as you read this, it's like, oh, where have I experienced that? Where have I seen that? And once you can remember your own experience, as negative as that may or may not be, then this begins to make more sense. Because it's like, yeah, I've been there.
Right, and that's how we are fallen. They haven't gotten into anything too crazy in terms of sin and the way it's pervasive into our
this
lives.
isn't going to be a rated R sort of thing.
No, and so I have experienced most of these things where I'm ticked off at the person 2 pews over because they're doing something, twiddling their thumbs.
And the person 2 pews over is ticked off over at you and the kids climbing around all over everything.
I see you looking at me a mess sometimes.
Okay, that person 2 pews over might be me. I'm just saying. I try not to, make a face.
But we have experienced this is the human experience.
Yeah.
And so you should be able to relate to a lot of these things if you understand what's happening.
Exactly. So, and if you don't, that's why we're here. We're going to illuminate you, or illumine you, or whatever the word is. Well, let's dive into letter to number 10 here. So, it starts off, and we reference this other devil, Triptweeze, and these other characters, just enjoy the language that he gives them and the names that he gives them, because we don't really care who they are. It just gives us another little picture that, these demons, and they're all around us, and they're all working on us. But he's talking about that now your patient has made some very desirable new acquaintances, and you seem to have used the event in a really promising manner. So what's happened is that this guy has entered into a new circle of friends. He's got some new friends. And the evil one seems to like these new friends, which tells us they're a bad influence.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the desirable new acquaintances, that's desirable to
the evil one.
Yes.
Yeah, they're desirable, which means they're all full of things that are going to cause this guy to go down the wrong path.
Yes.
And it seems that he goes and kind of describes, I gather that the middle-aged married couple who called at his office are just the sort of people we want him to know. Rich, smart, superficially intellectual, and brightly skeptical about everything in the world. So, why are those the kind of people? Well, we know, even the Lord Jesus himself says, how difficult it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. Because there is such an attachment to the things of the world. Smart. Well, smart can also turn you into a smarty pants. And I'm smart, and I don't really need to listen to anyone else because I've got it all figured out. And so you become more of I'm just going to tell you things, and I don't really have to listen. Superficially intellectual. So intellectual not on a deep level, but I know a lot of the current thinking on things, whether or not the current thinking on things is actually penetrating to what the thing is about. So superficially intellectual. These people that you talk to, if you've ever been in those circles or you're at a party or standing around with folks and they're going off and like, oh, I read such and such, or I saw this on TV and this is what I think about this and blah, 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 blah. And you're listening to this and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have anything to say. I feel kind of stupid in front of these people. You're probably not. They're probably just faking it. There's going to be a lot of faking talk in this chapter. Yes. And so that's superficially intellectual. Yeah. It's not terribly deep. And brightly skeptical about everything in this world. Boy, these are the complainers. I mean, you've got to... we talking about this at the beginning of the show. You've got to have something to complain about. So, I don't care if they say that. I don't care if they say that. I don't trust that science. I don't trust that study. I don't trust that commentator. I don't trust you. I don't trust me. We have to be skeptical about everything.
Which makes you, in your head anyways, better than everybody else.
Yes, you become the judge. And once you start judging everything, well, then there's nothing to judge you. You're above everyone. So these are great friends to hang out with. I mean...
I'd like to meet these people.
The evil one loves it because it's just going to pull this patient whose faith is still kind of young.
Mm-hmm.
He's not been a Christian for very long. And now he's going to meet these very worldly people. And I think that might be the best way to describe them. They're very worldly. These are the popular kids. So now he's hanging out with the popular kids. And who didn't want to hang out with the popular kids? Were you the popular kid, Jonathan?
I wouldn't necessarily call myself the popular kid.
Yeah, neither would I. I mean, me. I wouldn't call me.
Wow.
I wouldn't call me one of the popular kids either. But you all know who the popular kids were in school. Maybe you were the popular kid. And isn't it funny how high school and the dynamics of high school continue to play out in grown-up adult life, but we don't really recognize it happening? That bullying still happens among adult circles and whatnot, and we're always kind of maybe trying to jockey for a position, especially if we're not yet comfortable in our own skin or whatever, and trying to define ourselves by our friends, or I want to be in that circle, or I want to hang out with that guy or that person or whatever.
Yeah.
It leads to this, what he talks about in the chapter.
Or to see, I mean, now that you have things like Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
And that came after I was in high school, so
thank God. Thank God I didn't have to deal with all of this that our young people today
I became Facebook friends with a lot of people I knew in high school.
Yeah.
And then you see a lot of those people didn't really change. And it's a little bit scary that, it's the views you had of them then, and maybe you thought you wanted some part of or something else as you grow and mature and come into your of age.
Yep.
You're like, I'm glad I didn't pursue that or attain
when they
that.
When they write that in your high school yearbook, don't ever change, stay the same. Don't do that. You better be changing. You better not stay the same because you need to grow up. I've not met the high school senior who has got it all put together yet.
On the flip side, there are people who have changed and everything else.
All of your former classmates.
And it's a delight to see, people that... I have a former high school classmate that's running for mayor of the city of Stafford. It's a little suburb or part of Houston.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't know where Stafford is, but good for this person.
Yeah.
Ah, look at that.
So
these things, these complications that we already experience in high school, experience into adulthood, that is what leads to this. If you don't know who you are, and you begin defining yourself by the people around you, you're going to get into real problem.
And that happens a lot with any kind of the arts and athletes. Anything that when you have a hobby that takes over your life, a lot of times that begins to define who you are.
Right.
I am a football player.
And not even more than that, Jonathan, if you look to that football player or that athlete or that actor or that celebrity, that's kind of your icon. Like, I want to be just like so-and-so. I want to be just like LeBron James. I want to be just like, whomever. And you put that out there, and then that becomes your model. Whether you know it or not, you're going to start to become more like that person. And you are going to be defining yourself by that person. And in reality, the only person we should be conforming ourselves to is to Christ. Mm-hmm. That I need to know Christ, and Christ has got to be the one that my eye is ultimately focused on, and I want to conform myself to Christ.
Right. And that's why the saints are the greatest role models.
Yes.
Because they did conform themselves to Christ.
There are Catholic celebrities,
yes,
but celebrities for the right reason.
Because if you follow them and try to pursue what they did,
yes,
it will lead to Christ.
Yes, and at the same time, that doesn't mean you have to model every saint's life or what. Like, if you don't feel that Therese of Lisieux is leading you, it's like, gosh, she might challenge me in a way, but that might not be the path for me. Well, there might be another saint, mm-hmm, that Boniface really strikes a chord in my heart, and I see a lot of him, and I want to, model my life. It's really not about being that person. It's about that person showing you how someone like you can be conformed to Christ. And so I think we tend to find patron saints and saints that we're drawn to because they're like us. And it shows us even someone like me can be like Christ.
Right.
And there's an example. And that's a good thing. So let's kind of get to the meat and potatoes of this chapter here, Jonathan. That I think this next paragraph that begins, no doubt, he must very soon realize. So we're talking about the patient again, mm-hmm, and he's hanging out with these folks. His own faith is in direct opposition to the assumptions on which fall all of the conversation of his new friends is based. So he's standing around in these little circles, these little cocktail parties, and he's, having the little conversations, and he's listening to what they're talking about. And he realizes deep, deep down, this is not Catholic at its core. This is maybe Christian-ish or not. But all the conversation, maybe it's very worldly. Maybe it's very political. I mean, you're going to stand around in conversation circles today that are going to be very worldly and very political. And as you listen, if you're standing there amongst your Republican friends, or your Democratic friends, or your nonpartisan friends, whatever friends you got, whatever circle that you're standing in, you're going to begin, you cannot help but begin having conversations in those circles that are going to be contrary to your faith. If there isn't something stirring up in you when you begin talking hardcore Republican policy or hardcore Democratic policy, that you're going to necessarily encounter something that does not mesh with the Catholic faith. And you have to be able to recognize that.
Right.
This guy does not really recognize that. He may have this stirring, this tingling up, but he's going to push it down because he also wants to be worldly. He also wants to be superficial. He wants to fit in with his friends. And so he's going to be like, okay, I'm just not going to bring up that's kind of contrary to our faith, or the church really doesn't teach that, or the church would challenge us on that perspective.
I'm just going to let it slide.
We're just going to let that slide, and I'll have this conversation about whatever.
And that's where having that Catholic worldview, a well-formed Catholic worldview, because that's the danger too, is we let some of those things seep into our worldview.
Yes.
And make exceptions.
Yes.
And so with Catholicism there is no gray area.
It's pretty like this is good, this is not good. There may be different ways to approach this or that.
Right.
But ultimately, there are going to be definite things that, and I think this is where, if people are desiring, like, what are the things that I should really, really be focusing on? You should go to the USCCB, the United States Catholic Bishops' Conference website, and pull up the document on the forming a conscience, faithful citizenship today. Mm-hmm. Just read, reflect. It's not going to tell you how to vote. It's not going to say this is that you should vote for this person or that person, but it will help kind of give you that Catholic worldview. That as a Catholic, how am I supposed to be formed? Where should I be forming myself? And there's going to be things that I'm already naturally tending towards, and there's going to be some things that challenge me, and that I really need to maybe lean into a little more. And how to approach those things when you come to the ballot box.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So this guy, he's standing in the middle of these people, and he wants to be there. So what does he do? It's like when you're realizing, there are things that are making me uncomfortable, but now I don't want to make them uncomfortable.
Right.
So it's like what we were talking about before. I'm just going to start conforming myself to be more like this person. And it goes on to say that if he just plays well with them, that then they may become his friends. And so he just kind of, does what he should do. That, well, maybe I'll just laugh when I'm supposed to laugh, and I'll chuckle when I'm supposed to chuckle, and are there things I should speak up about? But I'm not going to, because that would really make things awkward and uncomfortable. So I'm going to be quiet.
Yeah.
It is...
or agree with something, throw out words of affirmation when you don't really agree with it, just to fit in.
Right, or to not make anyone uncomfortable. I mean, I think that's almost the mortal sin of the day, making someone else uncomfortable. That we don't want, and that's why, that old adage, and it's probably not even of the day, I don't know how long this has been around, but the old adage that you never talked about politics and religion in polite company, because that would set you on things of value. And we don't want to talk about values in polite company. We want to stay superficial, and then polite company, those aren't your friends. Those may be acquaintances. But if you cannot have value-based conversations about religion, about politics, about the things that matter, if you can't have those conversations with another person, and you can't disagree with that person, that is not your friend.
Right. And you need friends. I would say you need to have conversations about politics and religion with your friends, because if you aren't challenged in politics or religion...
Right.
Or if you're not held accountable in either of those, it'll be difficult to keep the faith and keep on that path.
And it helps you know what you know and don't know. Like, what do I really believe? You don't really know it until you put it out there. My closest friends, I don't agree with them at all most of the time. There are things that, we have conversations, and it's like, well, I don't understand where you're coming from. But you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to let that in and to be able to talk about that and wrestle with that. And it kind of is like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. I change my position on that, or I want to think about that differently. Or maybe you do so for the other person, that they realize and say, oh, of course, Jeff, what was I thinking? You know what you're talking about. And they conform their mind then to yours because it's just better. Or maybe not. This is what happens in conversation. You figure these things out. But he's not doing that. And I wrote in the margin of my book here the kind of the description of what's going on. The man is trying to be nice, but nice does not equal good. There's a difference between nice and good. That being nice is superficial. Being good goes deep.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be good, sometimes you're going to have to do something that society wouldn't define as nice. So I'm going to have to tell you, Jonathan, I don't know if you ever realized this, but when you say this or do that, you really end up hurting me or someone. Or your perspective on this, I think, is really messed up, because if we took that to its final conclusion, it would mean that all of these people don't matter. And so it's like, and that's going to be like, it's going to be criticizing you, it's going to be challenging you, and that's not nice, but if it brings you to conversion, then it's good.
Right. And that's the same thing with love. Willing the good of the other, not willing the nice feelings of the other.
Right.
Love is not always happy, and, as a parent, you love your kids.
Yeah.
You have to get mad at them at times. You have to make my 4-year-old cry because he has to go into timeout because he punched his brother or something. Whatever it is. It is, love is willing the ultimate good of the other.
Right. I can't remember what it was, but back when I was growing up in the 80s, they always have these made-for-TV movies, that they would show in the evening sometimes, and they would tend to deal with some topic of the day. And it was like a thing we did back then. I don't know, but it was a thing. But I remember there was something about, the moral of the story, the lesson basically was tough love. Mm-hmm. That, as parents, sometimes you have to show tough love to your kids. As a spouse, sometimes you have to show tough love, especially if there's addiction involved or, some kind of habit that I can no longer support. And in order to break that, in order to challenge you, I'm going to have to, I can't support you anymore. And I'm going to have to allow you to fall face forward in the gutter. I'm going to have to allow you to go without and sit in jail for the night because I'm not going to bail you out.
Right.
I'm going to have to let you have that detention at school, and I'm not going to go in there and yell at the principal. I'm going to let you face your consequences, even if it's not 100% right or 100%, it's like if you crossed the line, start learning what the consequences are on that. That's tough love. Mm-hmm. I love you enough to hurt you.
You would laugh like that.
I love you enough to allow you to be touched by your consequences. Mm-hmm. That is what God did with us in the fall. Adam and Eve sinned, and He wanted them to, he allowed them to experience the consequences of their sin so that they would know what was good and what was now evil. If He didn't allow them to experience the consequences of their sin, they would never know that disobedience to God is bad. They would be confirmed in their wickedness. Allowing someone to feel the consequences of his or her action, no matter how negative they are, is a good thing. We learn from them and we grow, and it hardens us. It steels us.
Right. And there are some things that we prevent, I want to touch a stove. Well, you stop them.
Exactly. If it's going to do irreparable harm or damage that you can really teach in other ways, yes, absolutely. Don't let them play in the street and say, well, let's let them deal with their consequences playing in the middle of Dodge.
I just want to cover our bases because someone's going to say, I let my kid play in the street, now look what happened.
You said let them experience the consequences. Yeah, don't be dumb. Let's just put that, that's the disclaimer. When you listen to us, don't be dumb. Okay, he makes a good summary statement here. All mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. I love that line. We would know it as fake it until you make it. And that cuts both ways. That you can fake it. You can say, I'm not smart, I'm not good, I'm not holy, well, so then pretend to be. Start acting like a holy person. Start acting like an intelligent person. Start acting like these things. If you truly, I'm not saying do it superficially, but you're really trying, okay, what does a holy person look like? What did Mother Teresa look like? What did Catherine Drexel look like? What did Peter Claver look like? You look at those saints and you say, I want to be like that, so I'm just going to start acting like they did.
Yeah. And
you slowly become more and more like that. It's how you learn any skill, John. Did you play an instrument?
I sure don't.
Do you play any sport?
Sure.
Well?
Yeah.
What do you play?
I played baseball for...
Really? Oh, you are a baseball fan.
I don't know how many years. 17 years of my life.
And you don't just step up to the plate and hit a home run, never having swung a bat before.
I mean, anything is possible, but that's not
possible.
More likely than not, that will never happen.
Right. You have to practice.
You will have to practice.
You have to practice a follow-through. You have to practice have the stance. You have to practice hitting. You build up some strength and all of these things. And the more and more you do it, if you start acting like a home run hitter, you become a home run hitter. It's not just visualizing it. Picture it and I'll be it. You do it and you become it. It's like anything. You practice and practice and practice, and it just becomes natural.
Right.
That's the way to think about sanctifying grace. The more you practice virtue, the more natural it becomes, the more God's grace works in your life.
Yeah, I was thinking this whole time of just, if you see what holy people do, or what you do deem to be holy people, it's like, oh,
right.
They go pray for an hour every day. You might not be able to go and sit there for an hour, but you start praying every day.
Right.
You're like, oh, these people do pray a rosary. I've never prayed a rosary.
I'll pray a Hail Mary.
I'll pray a Hail Mary.
That's good.
Or
Start.
I'll look it up and I'll do a rosary.
Yeah.
Just once. And then, some people pray multiple rosaries a day or whatever.
God bless
and it's
you.
just like, you could do one rosary a month.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
You start building a habit.
You start building those habits. And if you build those habits enough, you will become.
That is how sanctifying grace works. It works on habit, and virtue grows out of that. But the opposite is also true. And this is what the evil one is getting to in this work today. That if you also begin acting like negative influences, this is where negative peer pressure has its thing. Mm-hmm. If you hang out in those circles, you are going to become the people you hang out with. And if you begin developing bad habits, you are going to begin vice. Vice is the opposite of virtue, and it happens the same way. Unfortunately, it doesn't take as much practice to fall into vice. No. We tend to immediately trip and stumble into it.
And that's usually because most of the vices lead to that instant gratification, or you see the results right away.
They tickle the senses, like we talked about a couple chapters ago, that they make you feel good for a moment. It's like, oh, I want to do that again. And you immediately fall into that. Where the joy of a good habit takes, it's kind of the long game.
Suppose you sign up for a holy hour, never having prayed more than 15 minutes in your life.
Oh, you're going to be miserable. Unless there's a miracle of God that comes in.
After what seems like 3 hours, you check your phone and it's been 7 minutes.
What do I do now? Yeah. So it just takes time to build grace, to let that grace build upon you. I think, Jonathan, this is what has been a challenge for so many Catholics these days, because the pandemic shut everything down, and shut everything down for so long that good Catholics or well-intentioned Catholics got out of the habit of regular Sunday Mass, got out of the habit of maybe their daily visit to church, or their going and being in their Bible study or whatever. You got out of the habit of doing it. And even though you never intended to fall away from God, I don't know that you cannot help it.
Right.
With exceptional grace at work and exceptional intentionality, that when we stop practicing, the grace of habit also diminishes. That there must be a participation with God's grace. Right. Now that doesn't mean there's other kinds of grace, actual grace where God can just bam and throw some grace down upon us, but that's not the ordinary means of grace. No. Ordinary grace is sanctifying grace, habitual grace. Got to keep at it. Got to keep.
The tough thing is you don't just jump right back in and start where you left off. It's like working out. You work out every day for a year.
Yep.
It's easier to motivate yourself to get up and go and do the workout. You stop for 3 months. You motivate yourself that first day, but doing the next day is really hard. And then getting in that groove again is really difficult. Same thing with anything with the faith, is you stop doing something for an extended period of time.
It's hard to get back. It's grueling. Let's just jump to the end, Jonathan. Let's wrap this up. What is? I think there was something here towards the end that kind of hit that as we sum it up. He's talking about duplicity here. Mm-hmm. Duplicity is living two lives. And when you do this, like I'm going to live my Christian life, but then when I'm among my people of the world who are not Christian, I'm going to put that on the side and I'm going to be worldly.
Catholic friends, my fun friends.
Exactly. Exactly. Whatever. That it's like you and you. And when you start living two different lives, you lose a loss of, who am I? I don't know who I am anymore.
No identity.
Your sense of self disappears. And so duplicity, it's sinful because it's not real. It's not based on reality. I am not being me. And I don't even want to say I'm not being true to me, because I don't care if you're being true to yourself. You should be true to Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And if you are true to Jesus Christ, then you will be true to yourself, because that's who you are conformed. You are conformed to be like him.
Yeah.
So what'd you put for your title?
You cannot feed both God and mammon.
Oh, you pulled out some scripture. I pulled out some DC Comics. Two-Face. If you don't know who it is, it's a Batman villain. Anywho, Two-Face. You cannot be one and the other because it'll get you all messed up. You'll be a villain. Jonathan, go have a warm cup of something. Brighten your day. And I will see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Ciao, ciao.